to me, when I look at the Lance Purdy thing, what I see is, 20 years removed, or maybe 25 years removed, maybe closer to 30 years removed of Montana and Young. I really do. Purdy is a guy. I mean, I'm not saying Purdy's Montana, but Purdy is a guy who has all kinds of intangibles, and it's clear that he's but Trey's the guy who's got a stronger arm, and he's a faster athlete, and he's a stronger athlete, and he's a better runner, and he's bigger, stronger, faster, and he's very much like Steve Young. A lot of people would say, "Oh, come on, Krug, Steve Young's a Hall of Famer." Now you're comparing, Trey Lance to a Hall of Famer. What I'm saying is, look at Steve Young with what he was in Tampa, with like 11 touchdowns and 25 picks and a losing record and all kinds of fumbles and turnovers, and he was terrible in Tampa. But he was still 6'2", with a great arm, with unbelievable, almost unmatched speed, and some incredible physical gifts, and a determination and an intellect. So he was a great prospect. I see all those same things in Trey. I see a guy with really strong. He may not run like Steve Young, but he's a strong athlete, strong body, strong arm, really smart, wants it bad. Needs coaching, needs playing time, needs mentorship, needs, reps. But I see him as a guy that kind of the way I saw Steve Young with Tampa, just kind of an awesome prospect that needs to be coached up. But on the other side, was Steve ever going to take Montana's job? Well, no, not as long as Joe was there. Why? Because Joe had all these intangibles. And that's what I see with Brock, is that Brock's clearly got better speed than we think. He's really accurate, but he's got a lot of intangibles as well that people can't see. And that's, I think, a big part of his value proposition are his intangibles. So I actually see both Montana and Young became Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Now, I'm not saying Purdy's a Hall of Famer, and I'm not saying Lance is going to become a Hall of Famer. But I see Purdy as the guy with all the intangibles, who's not as good an athlete as Trey Lance, doesn't have the size, the strength, or the speed. Lance I see as a Steve Young, strong, fast, great physical potential, really smart, and really wants it. And but he's not there yet. So it's like, I give me your thoughts on that, because obviously quite a bit about the Niner history, the Niner quarterbacks. I'm not saying these guys are Hall of Famers, but it's interesting that we debated one guy who was like had all these intangibles and all this early success against another guy who had this incredible athleticism, almost an unmatched skill set, and was really smart and really wanted it. And they both found a way to Canton. It took Steve a while to get coached up to the point where he was the player that he was. Steve Young did not become, we should mention this, Steve Young did not play his best football at age 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. He played his best football at 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. It was the 90s. It was 92, 93, 94, 95, 96. That's Steve Young's, even beyond that, 97, 98. But, I mean, that's where Steve Young really kicked butt. It's very possible that we're looking at something very similar. So the idea that people, I think Brock Purdy definitely is better now and should play now. But I see a great prospect in Trey Lance, who is going to have a Steve Young like learning curve, and his best football, I believe, is coming, but I believe it's going to be in his late 20s. Give me your thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and really quick, just like on the Purdy and Montana piece, right? Montana wasn't the guy that had the big arm. That's why he wasn't taken in the first round. He didn't have the traits, right? That's the guys that are taken in the first round are the guys that have the traits. They've got everything that you can point to. They've got all these things about them, but that doesn't mean that they're going to become great quarterbacks. And Joe Montana was taken in the third round, and nobody expected him to come in and do what he did and become, really the greatest quarterback of his era. And that could be the situation with Brock Purdy. They're very similar guys. And in terms of some of those things, even going down to the injuries with their throwing arms, really, if you want to get all the way down to it. You look over at the other side with Steve Young, that's a great point. I've had this conversation, even discussing the issues with Sam Darnold, really is how I know some of this stuff is because of that. But you're right. Steve Young, he wasn't a good quarterback, really wasn't even that good in LA when he was in the USFL. Then when he went over to Tampa, he really struggled there on a really bad team. And even after he joined the Friars in 87 and 88 and 89, he wasn't very good in those games. If you go back and watch and look at the numbers, and if you actually watch those games, there was a big difference between the way that the Friars offense during that time ran when Steve Young was the quarterback compared to Joe Montana. And you're 100% right. It wasn't until 92 when he really came into his own, his second full year as a starter. And with Trey Lance, that could be the direction that it goes with him. Where they differ is that when Steve Young got to the NFL, he had been through everything. He had been through every possible scenario you could be on the football field. And Trey Lance hasn't been through every scenario you can be on the football field, at least not at a high level. He played at North Dakota State, and the time that he played at North Dakota State, they were Alabama. They were like even better than Alabama, really, when you can compare Alabama in the Division I FBS compared to North Dakota State and FCS. They blow everybody away. That's one of the reasons when you look back and you watched Trey Lance is you can see him make plays, and there were highlight reel plays. There's just normal plays. You could see him doing things, but it wasn't all the time, and it wasn't in a situation where he was never in a tight game in the fourth quarter. It was never close. The closest they got, there was one game where they were trailing, but they scored a touchdown on their first, as they were on a drive. They score a touchdown right at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and then they go ahead and they win by double digits. That's the only time in his career at North Dakota State that they were even behind in the fourth quarter at all. So, that's just one of the things. And I think that's where when you look at Trey Lance as a prospect and you talk about him being raw, people point to the lack of throws, but it's not just the lack of throws. It's the lack of experience in game situations. He wasn't put in certain things that you would have a quarterback need to do. That's, I think, the biggest area that you can point to. And that's one of the hard parts about developing him at the NFL level. If you want to keep having a win, right, this is a guy who you're teaching. He's like, Steve Young even said this, I think, talking with you a long time ago on the radio. And it was like, we're looking at this guy. He's like at the very bottom, and we're going to have to really have a lot of patience with him because it's going to take a lot of work, and we're going to see him grow and really mature right in front of our eyes compared to a lot of these other guys that were drafted around that same time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at Steve Young's stats here. He comes out of, first of all, he played in the USFL. So he comes to the NFL. He's 24. How old's Trey right now?
I think it's 23 now.
23. So he starts 5 games as a rookie. He goes 1-4 with 3 touchdowns and 8 picks. He comes back the next year as his second year in the pros at 25. He starts 14 games. They go 2-12. He throws 8 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. The Niners trade for him at age 26 and 87. He basically sits 87, 88, 89 behind Montana. Had a couple starts in there every year, but basically sat through his 20s. He didn't really start with the Niners until 91, where he started 10 games. His prime, he busts out really in 92, leads the Niners to a 14-2 record, 25 touchdowns, 7 picks, MVP, Player of the Year. If you look at Steve Young's prime, it was he basically didn't do anything in his 20s, and he dominated from age 31 to age 37. At age 37, he goes 11-4, 36 touchdowns, 12 picks. He was finished 4th in the AP Offensive Player of the Year balloting. He was a Pro Bowler, and then that's 98, or that was 99. He plays 3 games, gets knocked out, end of his career right there. But I mean, his prime was, a player's prime, so let's say 26 to 34. he didn't even play till he was 30, and his prime was really 31 through age 37. So let me ask you this, Jack. If the 49ers really, if history is indeed repeating itself, and Trey Lance is going to have a Steve Young career, which is possible because we know Steve Young had this career. So it's not like it's impossible that this could happen. It could happen. Then what do the Niners do? Do you think the Niners are wed to Trey Lance long term, knowing that they've got an awesome young prospect with great intangibles, great desire, and knowing that they had Steve Young? They know all the facts that I just read you, Kyle Shanahan is keenly aware of. He knows that Steve Young wasn't good until really his father came along. And I mean, his father helped Steve Young become this incredible player and win the Super Bowl in 1994. Kyle understands that Steve Young 31 to 37 was way better than Steve Young 21 to 27. And that's rare. What if Trey Lance is going to be on that trajectory, would the Niners figure out a way to make it work on the cap going forward? Or is this a product of yesteryear? And in today's NFL, because of the cap, there is no mechanism for a Steve Young to stay with the 49ers, in this case, a Trey Lance to stay with the 49ers for many, many years ahead and potentially come of age the same way Steve came of age, maybe in a few years. I mean, literally, even if Trey was super slow in developing and took 2 more years, we're still talking about 26. He's 26 in 2 years, right? So, that's 4 years, 5 years before Steve busted out. That's a lot of time. If you thought Trey Lance could get to Steve Young category and develop into a great player, wouldn't it behoove the 49ers to figure out a way to just make the money work?
That's where it becomes difficult, right? Because it's not just about the 49ers, though. It's about Trey Lance wanting to, or being willing to sit or do those types of things. And it really depends on what happens with Brock Purdy, right? If Brock Purdy is the guy that finished off last season and he's able to do that, then we're never going to see Trey Lance even 5 years down the road. Because if what we saw from Brock Purdy last year, that's like top 5 level quarterback stuff in the NFL in terms of, yes, say whatever you want about the offense and the wide open throws, but the numbers that he put up, if he's able to continue to play at that level in terms of the numbers, I'm not even saying that. I would expect him to actually improve a little bit in terms of some of the things that he was bad at. If he continues to do that, he's going to be your long-term quarterback, and he's going to cost you some money down the road. And I don't see Trey Lance saying, I'll stay here for, $5 million for the next 4 years and sit on the bench and all those kind of things. I just don't see that. Trey Lance needs to play. He needs to be on the field a lot. And it all depends on, we're going to find out when we get to training camp. Is Brock Purdy there day one? When does Brock Purdy come back? Where is he? It just really depends on how this situation plays out, whether or not they would keep him long-term. And it's, you mentioned it's different today because you have a salary cap. You've got a roster that you've got to build. The 49ers are already spending a lot of money in other positions. It's one of the reasons, the quarterback salary of Brock Purdy is one of the reasons, or Trey Lance, whatever you want to say, is one of the reasons they're able to afford, actually their whole quarterback room being so low, is one of the reasons why they can afford to give Deebo Samuel the contracts that they've given him and Nick Bosa what he's going to get, what Fred Warner got, and so on and so forth. They need to kind of keep that room where it is, at least for the next few years. And Trey Lance is going to be coming up. That's a really tough ask. I think I don't think Trey Lance, I know he says he likes San Francisco. He likes being here. He's not asking to be traded, but when his contract comes up, I just find it very hard for him to say, I'll stay here for a couple more years and be a backup if that's what the situation is at that point.
So interesting because, Bill Walsh, in this case, with Lance, the 49ers would be Tampa. The 49ers would be the team that says, you know what, we can't make it work. We're going to move off the quarterback. And yet, and I know, if they go with Purdy, and even if Purdy winds up winning him a Super Bowl, if they pivot off of Lance and Lance has a Steve Young like late career run where he's a great player, an MVP, a Canton, Ohio type quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
History is not going to shine brightly on Shanahan and Lynch for the decisions they made. They'll be raked over the coals for letting this quarterback go. Even if Purdy has success, even if they climb to the mountaintop with Purdy. It just is interesting to me. It's like the 49ers are now in a kind of a real tough spot. If they start the super raw quarterback and give him the field time that he needs, they may not win games and they may not win a Super Bowl. And there can be people saying that, get rid of Kyle Shanahan at some point. And Jed's going to be impatient and everybody's going to be impatient because that's the world we're in. But if he goes with Purdy and trades Lance, or somehow Lance moves on and becomes a great player like Steve became a great player later in his career, people are going to second guess Kyle and be like, you know what? They blew it. Kyle couldn't develop, Lance, the way that Tampa couldn't develop Young.
Yeah, but if the 49ers are winning Super Bowls with Brock Purdy, doesn't that last part of your argument go away? If you're going to
maybe not.
And here's what I say: if you're going to say that Kyle Shanahan couldn't develop Trey Lance, and he's doing great over there, but Kyle Shanahan's winning Super Bowls with Brock Purdy, didn't Kyle Shanahan develop Brock Purdy into a Super Bowl champion? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what I meant. That's where I'm getting at with that last part of what you said. Because I've seen that a lot come up, and it's very similar to what we saw with the Warriors, right? The Warriors trade James Wiseman. He goes out and he's scoring a bunch of points because he's playing a lot. It's not like the team's doing any better, but he's putting up better points. And it's basically just his point increasing is just because he's getting more playing time. He's not doing anything in terms of helping the team win long term. It's an interesting situation. People, I'm sure there'll be some groups that'll get on it. But if you're the 49ers and you're winning a Super Bowl or multiple Super Bowls with Brock Purdy instead, I don't think you really care in terms of any kind of backlash about what Trey Lance does. I would think that the 49ers would actually like Trey Lance to do great if he's not with them, as long as they're winning Super Bowls. It doesn't impact what their goal is.
Yeah. And it's funny, all those years with Steve, sitting behind Joe, when they went to him, he never said, I want to be traded, but he's like, I want to play. I want to play. Even though Joe was Joe and he was great, when they asked Steve about it, I want to play. I want to play. And if you ask Trey about, hey, if Brock's the starter, I want to be here. I want to be here. He's, you know what I mean? He doesn't. He's not saying I want to be traded. Steve didn't say he wanted to be traded away from the Niners, but he did say he wanted to play, and you couldn't fault him for it, right? Because obviously, players want to play.